All right, what's up, family? This is going to be something different. This is about a history that I had no idea existed, but I want to share that with you. As you could tell by the thumbnail, we're going to talk about the Chinese connection to Jamaican music culture. All right? So, a friend of mine sent me a video and it piqued my interest. So, I said, you know what? I'm going to do a video about it. So I did a little research. So what you're going to see in this video is the combination of my research. Now, I may not have everything correct, but I'm pretty much in the ballpark. But before we get into the video, I think that it's important that we talk about the history first to set up the video. Okay, here it is. During the British rule of Jamaica, African slaves were imported as laborers starting in the mid 1600s. Irish indentured workers were also used from the 17th to the 18th century, the majority transported by force as political prisoners of war from Ireland. After slavery was abolished, the British imported indentured servants from India and China to supplement the labor pool. As many freedmen resisted working on plantations, a few hundred Germans were also recruited. Eventually, Jewish and Lebanese immigrants seeking refuge from persecution also settled on the island. Almost all the Chinese who arrived in Jamaica prior to 1980 were from the Hakka ethnic group that came from the cluster of villages within 20 miles of each other in an area known as Shenzhen. The 1943 census shows that the Chinese residing in Jamaica divided into three categories: China born, local born, or Chinese colored, the latter referring to multiracial people of mixed African and Chinese descent. After Jamaica gained independence from the British, this classification was abandoned and the group became locally known as Jamaican Chinese. By 1963, the Chinese had a monopoly on retail trade in Jamaica, controlling 90% of dry goods stores, 95% of supermarkets, along with extensive holdings in other sectors such as laundries and bedding parlors. See, this bothers me. Here you have the most of the population, 90 plus percent, 95 plus percent is African Jamaican. Yet a small percentage owns the economy in Jamaica. This is important because these were the people who were able to invest and set up these record companies that we're going to talk about in this video. Anti-Chinese violence and political unrest during the 60s and 70s led many islanders of Chinese descent to migrate to Canada, the United States, United Kingdom. University, education, and career prospects were attractive incentives to leave Jamaica permanently. Early Chinese record producers were mostly behind-the-scenes guys, technicians, distributors. In their heyday, they were virtually unknown outside of Jamaica. However, the music from the roots reggae era has continued to spread throughout the world. So that's a little bit of the history, but there's much more. There's many other Chinese that I could talk about in this video, but it's not necessary. You just need to know that the Chinese played a significant role in the development of Jamaican music culture.
I mean, the man that we all refer to as the father of hip hop from Jamaica. Okay, Barry and the Dragonaires. Baron and the Dragonaires. Baron Lee was a Jamaican. Number one. All my influence come from Jamaica. The Skylight. The Skylights. I never.
Now he's trying to change the narrative. Now he's saying all his influences was from Byron Lee and the Dragonaires and from Jamaica. The brother is clearly, having a case of revisionist history because let's face it, when he came to the States, there was no reggae. Even though Byron Lee was into ska and rock, some would say he ushered it in. basically. But he's not even telling you this. Byron Lee was Chinese. So let's look into a little bit of the history of Byron Lee.
Byron Lee. This visionary genius musician and producer invented rocksteady, which evolved into reggae. In 1967, a Shanghai-born singer named Stephen Cheng came to Jamaica to record a song, which was a Taiwanese folk tune called Always Together. He teamed up with Byron Lee for the instrumentals, and the beats that Byron produced were an adaptation of ska and would become known as rocksteady. Byron Lee also gets the credit for introducing the electric bass guitar to Jamaica. The musicians on the island only used to play the double bass, which Lee found bulky and difficult to move around from gig to gig. He would thus spark a musical revolution in Jamaica when he imported and started using the electric bass guitar, which was louder and clearer than the double bass and boasted of an in-your-face quality that was irresistible to listeners. And it was this bass guitar which was instrumental in launching the careers of reggae pioneers like Jimmy Cliff, Toots and the Maytals, and the Blues Busters. His band, Byron Lee and the Dragonaires, was one of the leading bands in Jamaica, and they even made an appearance in the 1962 James Bond movie, Dr. No, which was partly filmed in Jamaica. The band is also credited with unveiling and introducing future reggae legends like Dennis Brown, who began to perform with the band at the age of 9, and Marcia Griffiths, who started out as a backup singer with Byron Lee and the Dragonaires at the age of 15. Lee established Dynamic Studios in 1969, and it became the foremost recording facility in the entire Caribbean. It was the studio where an uncountable number of hits were created for the likes of Toots and the Maytals, Eric Donaldson, Jimmy Cliff, and Bob Marley. Incidentally, it was the studio where Bob Marley went to record his first single titled One Cup of Coffee.
I want you to listen to Byron Lee as an older man talking about his life, but I want you to pay close attention to what he says about the bass and who was his influences, why he got electric bass. He's the one, like I said, like they said in the earlier video, he introduced the bass to Jamaica. And if you think about reggae music, where would reggae music be without those bass lines? This is the man responsible for it. All right, so let's listen to a little bit of this interview.
After I graduated from school, I played football, soccer. And a lot of people don't know this, that I was one of the schoolboy top scorers in the 1950s at St. George's. I scored 13 goals, 14 for that year. And then when we won those victories in the 55, 56, 57, 3 cups a year we won, I used to celebrate the victories at Emmett Park. And there I met Ronnie Nasrallah, Ryan Peralta, Sester Chu, and Alti East. And we used to rejoice of our victories with music. But the piano upstairs was a big piano that could not come downstairs. So I said I had to play concert. I was bought the guitar and I did some lessons. And I went from the piano to the guitar, and then when I said to myself, there's nobody in Jamaica or the Caribbean that plays a bass. It's all standing bass.
Okay.
And then again, I watched the Sullivan Show. I watched the R&B artists, and they was using the electric bass. And I have proven the other day that I was the first person, a musician in the Caribbean, to bring an electric bass into the Caribbean.
Tell me about the door that was used as well.
So, hey, you heard him say it himself. He was influenced by the R&B groups who were using electric bass. So even through a Chinese man, America, Black American culture had a major effect on what he decided to do musically.
But let's go. Tom Wong. Tom Wong was the founder of the island's first commercially successful sound system, which he established in 1950. He basically created the template that others would adopt and replicate. To get a proper grip on how big a deal this was, we need to take a look at the history of the sound system culture. Back in those days in Jamaica, not too many people in the inner cities and ghettos could afford record players in their homes. Those who could would often set up their gear outside so their neighbors could come around, listen, and have a dance and a nice time. Eventually, some business-savvy people found that they could sell drinks or food and invest the returns in better sound system equipment, and this created what became an integral part of inner city culture. Indigenous genres of Jamaican music like ska and rocksteady were being ignored by the radio stations and could only be heard at these sound system events. Thus by the 1950s, Sound systems were even more popular than live bands and radio. Tom Wong started the sound system by first investing in powerful amplifiers and assembling a professional crew of a selector, sound engineer, and an MC.
So, the sound clash culture was created by a Chinaman. Let that sink in. So, should we give the Chinese credit for creating hip hop? Just think about that. All right, let's deal with this myth about the Jamaican sound class culture and its impact in hip hop in New York. As you know, there's some people out there who are trying to link what went on in the 50s in Jamaica as part of the hip hop story. Let me tell you, in my opinion, it does not. Because basically what they're saying is because they had big sound systems in Jamaica, and if you see big sound systems in America, that's the link. There's no evidence at all that points to a correlation between Jamaican sound class culture and whatever was happening in America. Even Herc said he got his system from Americans. He knew nothing about Jamaican sound class culture. He said that in an interview. So let's put that to rest as far as the influence. Okay? So let's be practical here. What do speakers do? They're a vehicle to produce sound. You could play any kind of music through these speakers. It doesn't mean because it's a large system that somehow that's hip hop. That's ridiculous. You could play the same kind of music through small speakers and you'll get the same reaction. The same kind of music would be similar to whether it's coming from a large system or a smaller system. Give you a case in point. When Charlie Chase went to the Monterey Rec Room to see the Monterey crew, he noted that they had small speakers, but what attracted him was the music coming from those speakers. They were break beats. Break beats is a part of hip hop, not the speakers. So we can't get caught up in the size of the speakers because that does not make hip hop. It's just a vehicle to produce sound. For example, if I were to play congas or bongos in a funk band, it doesn't mean I'm playing Latin music. The congas or bongos are just instruments, and the speakers are just instruments as well. Now, let me tell you this. When you talk about hip hop culture, the boombox, in my opinion, has more of a kind of a signature to hip hop because just about everyone had a boombox, had mixtapes. They would set it down, listen to it, or dance to the music coming from the boombox. That to me has more to do with hip hop than having large speakers. Large speakers is for one purpose only. It's basically to play in a large arena, play outside, and if you want a clean sound, it's best to have a more powerful system. How does that connect to hip hop? I have no clue. Okay, so let's get off of this myth about this Jamaican connection to hip hop in New York. It doesn't exist. Even Herc said his influences with James Brown. It has nothing to do with whatever was happening in Jamaica. So let's stop rewriting the history and deal with the history as it was. All right? Another thing we have to remember, you can't find nowhere in the 70s where the word or the phrase sound class culture was ever mentioned. Just like hip hop culture wasn't mentioned in the 70s. It didn't exist. So let's stop reinventing the history and stick what we can prove.
Vincent and Patricia Chin. In the late 1950s, a couple opened a record store called Randy's Record Mart. Vincent Chin had previously worked for a multi-millionaire hotel owner named Isaac Issa, stacking records into jukeboxes. He began to collect the old discarded records and eventually began to sell them out of his own store. This tour would become the stepping stone to establishing the world's biggest reggae record label. By the early 1960s, many Jamaicans had moved abroad to form a populous and thriving Jamaican diaspora in the UK, the US, and Canada. These folks abroad were homesick and longed for music from Jamaica. This stimulated a thriving record export market. The Chins sensed an opportunity beyond just selling records, and after moving their store to a new site, they converted part of it to a recording studio. And by 1968, their studio, named Studio 17, became just one of Jamaica's top recording outfits and recorded thousands of artists that included the Wailers, the Heptones, Dennis Brown, Gregory Isaacs, Burning Spear, and virtually all the top acts from the late 1960s down to the mid-1970s. The Chins moved to New York in 1977 and established a store on Jamaica Avenue in Queens. They made their move to harness the power of a fast-growing Jamaican community that was one of the most populous and vibrant Jamaican clusters outside of the island itself. They established VP Records, which would go on to act as an international distributor of reggae music. And this, more than any other single factor, became a launch pad for reggae music to go international, starting from the US. Today, as far as reggae is concerned, 9 out of 10 international superstars are VP Records affiliated. The Chinese-Jamaican community has played and continues to play an amazing role in the establishment and movement of reggae music, from a Jamaican-born art form to one of the greatest genres of music in the world today.
VP and the Chins have been to the spread and the internationalization of Jamaican music over the last, well, they've been involved in 60 years, but in terms of what we saw with Sean Paul and Neil Manning, all of these acts, there was a time when a lot of record labels in America had signed Jamaican acts. Everybody and his dog and the cat at home were signed to a label, because it was a natural outgrowth of these major electronics companies like Sony and Philips, which were concerned with acquiring content developers and creators. So what they did, companies like Sony and Philips, they started to buy up a lot of record labels and a lot of film companies. And of course, as a result of that, a lot of Jamaican acts got signed. And it was as if one night, the labels all of them just got together and dropped all the Jamaican acts. And what resulted was a breach, a vacuum was left. That vacuum was filled by VP. Because it was VP that understood how to market Jamaican music. Because, and we see it all the time, the success of Jamaican music internationally is at its best when it is marketed by Jamaicans or people who understand Jamaica. That's why Chris Blackwell's Island Records and VP have been so successful in terms of spreading Jamaican music. So VP really filled an important gap at the time in terms of making sure that there was a presence, because many people might not understand the history, but when the record companies took on our artists, they said that most of them were not radio friendly. And so what they did was they tried to recreate them. And what they did in that recreation was alienate them from their core constituency. And the crossover market was looking to the core constituency for validation. Because if I want Indian food, I go and look in the restaurant and see if any Indian people inside here. And if I don't see any, I go and walk away. And Jamaicans were not buying the records because it was anything that they knew. VP allowed the Jamaican acts to be themselves, and they were able to succeed on their own terms. That's how you had a Sean Paul with Give Me the Light being such a massive hit.
Y'all remember this video.
And its culture.
I think that
You know, my family is Jamaican, and Latino and Jamaican are Caribbean people. You know, with tropical people. You know, with people that understand what that timing and that rhythm and that pocket feels like in a way unlike any other culture of people. You know, from the bass lines to the way we choose to place our words as people of the Caribbean and of the tropics. I think that it's just it's something you can't really define in words. It's a feeling thing. You know what I'm saying? It's like when you watch Latinos do the South Side of Merengue and you see Jamaican people, you know, do their shit. It's kind of like something that goes hand in hand. And, you know, it ain't a coincidence that in every urban community, Latino and blacks is there together. That ain't no accident. You know what I'm saying? You know, it's not like you find in every urban community, you know, Middle Eastern and black or Asian and black. You know, you always see Latino and black. And I think we just so a part of each other's cultural significance, not only as tropical people, but even here in the United States, where the multicultural, because the U.S. ain't got no culture. They shit is all our shit. A bunch of our shit is what makes the U.S. whatever you want to call it. We still don't know what that culture is for the U.S., but it's a mix-up of all of our cultures. And in the urban community, you know, the Latino and the West Indian has the greatest influence, and we've always had, and we'll always will, and it's just been that way. So,
heard you converted to Islam?
I've been Islam.
Okay.
I've been Islam since I was 12, 13 years old.
Wow. This is the guy that said black Americans don't have any culture. Now, clearly, okay, to be fair, in the clip you heard earlier, he said America don't have any culture. But you heard him earlier repping the Latinos and the Caribbeans as the tropical people who gave America its sauce. So clearly, he's saying black America don't have a culture. However, he clearly used black American culture for his come up. Now he reaches a certain level. Now it's all about Jamaica and how Jamaica influenced him in all of his success. Herc made the similar statement, talking about Byron Lee, how Byron Lee was very influential in his career. But when you listen to earlier interviews of Herc, he clearly says Funk and James Brown. So this is what these guys do. They use black American culture for their come up. And then once they get to a certain level of success, then it's about the Caribbean or it's about Latin America. So the truth of the matter as it relates to hip hop, none of those cultures had an effect on hip hop and how it evolved. That's the basic fact. So if you don't know, now you know. That's just Buster as a stand-in for the shock that many Jamaicans might have in discovering that their music culture was heavily influenced by the Chinese. One could really argue, had it not been for the Chinese in Jamaica, the world may not have ever heard of Jamaican music, more specifically reggae. That's how important the Chinese are to Jamaican music culture. So when you talk about that history, and then you hear people like Herc saying he used his Jamaican culture, he got to include the Chinese. There's no way that you could say that that mix had anything to do with the influence of hip hop or the creation of hip hop. Keep in mind, we can't forget that there was an American component to it, an African American component to it as well. We influenced the Jamaicans as well. So their culture, their music culture is mixed up with all these different cultures, but yet they want to say they created hip hop. It's very disingenuous to suggest that. So I want to make it clear. I want to say this again. The Chinese were distributors. They worked in the studios. They were musicians. They ushered in a lot of different musical influences into Jamaican culture. That's just a fact. So we just got to get the record and keep the record clear and correct. All right, so with that being said, like, subscribe, definitely thumb up the video. And so until the next time, peace.